In this video series, I will seek to break down what I think it means to be a genius. We will logically explore and develop the origins of the genius and his evolution. We will use common sense and accessible inferences, and at the end of this series, we will develop a working definition of what it is to be a genius or what is a genius. In later versions of these video articles, we'll have much tighter references, but for now, let's allow our minds to speculate and be creative. And in other videos on this channel, we'll then go on to use the tools that we developed in this genius series. As a disclaimer, I'm not a genius, so don't take any advice that I give as the advice of a genius. I'm a simple engineer, but having worked in engineering and having studied engineering, I've been around my fair share of genii. I'll use the word geniuses because it's much simpler and it sounds better. So I've spent over a decade observing these guys. I've also grown up in spaces where you couldn't find a genius for as long as you walked. So I've also been able to contrast both these groups. So let's get into step one of being a genius. And step one is called the savage genius. For us to grasp what it means to be a genius, for us to really understand what it means to have a level of mental abilities that could be classified as genius, before we even attempt to scrutinize or analyze what it means to be a genius, I would like to ask you to cast your mind back to the times when mankind was at his technological infancy. Before the airplanes and the rockets we have today, primitive man was in a large world, far larger than he was. Some of the creatures in that world were much bigger, much wilder, and much faster, with much greater speed and power than he had. This was before we had large vehicles and other types of equipment and tools that allow us, as the human race, to balance out the speed and strength advantages that some animals have over us. I sometimes imagine the Khoi and San people found in South Africa as a fair representation of what such an existence might somewhat have looked like, or the people native to the South American rainforest as an approximation of that life. The interesting thing is that the Khoi and San way of life has been largely preserved until very recently in certain parts of South Africa. Primitive man used animal skins to cover himself as a form of clothing. For food, he relied on hunting mostly small animals and collecting edible roots and berries. In South Africa today, women still pick wild herbs in rural settlements. Perhaps primitive man did the same. For defense and mechanical advantage, he used tools such as sharpened sticks, stones, and even bones. These tools increased his capacity beyond what his bare hands could do. He also used fire. The Bushmen used sharpened sticks that they rubbed together to cause a fire through friction. The question that I think we need to ask ourselves is, how did he come to know these things? How did he develop these technologies? Because these were the most advanced technologies at the time in that long forgotten world. As someone with a background in design, I can tell you that a lot of design solutions seen in final products are somewhat accidental. They sometimes fit themselves into the final solution. Like doing a puzzle, the pieces tell you where to place them. You can think of this aspect of design as function dictating form. I also know that a lot of critical discoveries in history were accidental, such as the discovery of stainless steel by Harry Breary or the process of hardening aluminium called age hardening. These were accidental discoveries. So one of the things that I think contributed to mankind's knowledge was accidental occurrences. Perhaps a grassland or a savanna burnt down, and the roasted buck that he found there was so delicious that he was hooked, and from that day he developed a taste for cooked food. Was that the first braai? So that's the first thing that I would say contributed to his knowledge. accidental occurrences, more specifically, observing accidental occurrences and accidentally deriving a form from a functional need. The second thing that I think contributed to his knowledge was inspiration. Take, for instance, the story of Cain and Abel as found in the Quran. When Cain had slain his brother, he saw a raven scratching on the ground. That gave him the idea to dig a hole and bury his brother. Was this the first burial? God knows. The Quran describes that God had inspired him to do so by sending the raven. Throughout Africa, you see dancers being inspired by animal movements. So inspiration would, in my view, also have contributed to his knowledge. Maybe one day he saw a lion hunt and eat a buck, and then he saw a dead lion on another day and got to check out its claws. He then decided he needs claws of his own. Maybe that's how the long dead inventor of the spear discovered his open source killer app. No pun intended. Also, these traits so far required him to have a keen sense of observation. Observation then becomes the third trait that binds all these traits together. So the three main factors that gave him those tools were accidental occurrences, inspiration, and observation. And these three things created new knowledge. And once it was known, it became established knowledge. So those three factors created new knowledge, and when everybody knew this knowledge, it became established knowledge. So that's the first step to becoming a genius, which we haven't defined yet. You have to have a sense of the established knowledge and what the established knowledge is. But just having a sense of the established knowledge won't make you a genius. In this environment, you would just be the most learned or knowledgeable man in that primitive world. That's not enough to make you a savage genius. To be a savage genius, you need to have an understanding of the observations, inspiration, and accidents that produce the established knowledge in the first place. You should seek to understand the origins of the established knowledge. The great thing about using the world of primitive man as a stage for our thought experiments is that there were far fewer man-made objects and technologies around, and therefore the amount of established knowledge at the time was far less complex than it is today. Whoever came up with the established knowledge of how to brew and make coffee, you're my favorite. With these simple tools, he had improved his capabilities and his capacity. Through his observation of accidents and his institutionalization of inspiration, he could fulfill his most basic needs. When these things were new, they were ingenious, but they slowly became mundane and ordinary. This reality tells us that novelty and newness is part of genius, but we'll hold that concept in mind and we'll keep it on the shelf for now. And maybe it can help us. We'll use it when we try to give ourselves a definition of what it means to be a genius. But novelty and newness seems to be part of that. For us, looking at the origins of mundane things through the prism of these three traits allows us to infuse these mundane things with a new excitement, to frame these things in a new light. It is that ordinariness that will lead us to step two of how to be a genius, which we'll discuss in the next video.